Hello, Pastor Samuel Sanchez. How you doing today?
I am doing absolutely fabulous. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me here. My good friend George.
Yes. So this is our first podcast that we're doing, and basically, this first podcast is going to introduce the world to Pastor Sanchez,
hmm
and we're gonna part. This is going to be part one, and we're going to find out what Pastor's all about. We're going to find out his story. We're going to find out all the things he's been through as a preacher's kid and
Mm.
rebelling and coming back to Christ. And it's just such a wonderful story. So, folks, put on your seatbelts, get your popcorn ready, because this is going to be amazing story that's going to bless a lot of people. And this is part one now. This is going to be part one, probably about 20, 30 minutes. And so we're going to start this. So, Pastor Sam, tell
Yes.
us your story from day zero when you were born, and we'll go from there.
All right. I'm actually 43 years old now, and thank God I'm still fairly young. That I get to do what I do today, 2021. But as George said, my life wasn't always where I'm at right now. So he's asked to start from the very beginning. We're the type of family that we grew up in ministry. In in the 70s, my parents got married, and my dad just on my dad's side ministry. We come from a long line of ministers. Man, you can go down our line. My dad's his name is Samuel Sanchez Senior. And in his family, there's preachers, evangelists. They're known for musicians. And same thing goes on my mother's side. And well, it just so happened that one day, my mom and her mom ended up at my dad's parents' church. And that's kind of where it all began. They began to date, and God called my father to ministry in his early 20s. He and my mom got married, and I remember she shares this story with me, and I love every time she shares it with me that my dad, after serving as an assistant pastor at his father's church, felt the calling to go open his own church. And even statistics today they show that, and we were speaking about this yesterday. They show that a lot of wives prefer their husbands not to be pastors, and of course, my mom was kind of on that same boat. But my dad was persistent and insisting that he had a calling on his life. And so now this is talking about way back. You want to start from ground zero. So one day, my dad comes up to my mom yet again and says, honey, I really feel God's tugging at my heart to find a church and to go establish a church. And reluctantly, my mom told him on this very day, she said, if this is true, if this is really going to happen, you're going to go out today. You're going to go out today. And if you do not find a church today, it means that it's not your calling. So I think my dad, he took the challenge. And so he walked out the door with the plan of going to find a church building somewhere where they could gather and worship God and praise God and birth a church. So sure enough, my dad goes out cruising, I'm sure, and I'm sure he went to different places, and he ends up in Grand Prairie, passing 14th Street and coming up to a street called Sampsell Street. And going there, he saw some land that was for sale. And I will have you know that he bought that land that same day, got the deed, came home, told my mother, okay, here's the deed to a church. We're going to start a church. And my mom could not believe it. She was like, well, surprised actually, because she didn't think that this was going to happen. And it did. And they began to build a church. And I love when they tell me the day that the last nail went in that church, everything was paid off and they were ready to begin to have church. That was in 1978 when Horeb was first established. And we praise God because 40 something years down the line, Horeb is still in existence. It's still going strong today. Thanks to God, because the roots at this church grow so deep. The foundation, and I'm not just talking about a physical foundation, but the foundation of this church is truly built on the rock, which is Jesus Christ. So moving along, they built the church, and I think something very important to point out is and I say this with a lot of respect, without disrespecting my parents, uneducated. Back in those days, even George, a lot of parents, and I'm sure you can relate, we Hispanics were very uneducated in those days. And people expected this ministry to fail, but to everybody's surprise, for the glory of God, the ministry began to grow at a very rapid pace. My parents pastored for 16 years in the area of Grand Prairie. And from the very get-go, the first year, they told me that they had 50, 60, 70, 80, and the church got to be up to about 400 people just packed into this small building, people that loved the Lord and were seeking his face. So God began to move in this ministry. And in saying that, when God is moving in a ministry like that, the enemy is always looking for a place to come and sneak in and knock ministries down. And 16 years later, I believe I was 9 years old. And are we going to go through the whole thing, George, this first time?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe I was 9 years old, and knowing something was off, between mom and dad. And just at 9 years old, you hear stuff, and the church was still going strong. But even as a 9-year-old, you hear stuff and you pick stuff up. You maybe don't understand exactly everything that's going on, but you pick up the energy at the house, the energy at the church. And there was something going on that wasn't right. And sure enough, we share this story. It's part of our life. It's part of our testimony. The enemy came in, and there was a big split in the church. I was 9 years old, and we're just going to say this out loud with total respect to my family, but my dad had an affair inside the church. And when you say this out loud, it devastates, especially a church that was growing that rapid and with that many people. It totally devastated the congregation. I mean, the church, people left, people talked bad about us, and people held grudges against our family, and different things like that. But I've learned that what the enemy intends for bad, God always turns it around for the good of those who love him. We have to remember that. Of course, at 9 years old, you don't understand any of that. You just know that something is off. Well, mom, dad split. The church started just declining in membership and attendance, and the church suffered a loss of people, finance. When something like that happens, it just nothing good. So the church just started declining, and us growing up with that divorce, divorce came, mom and dad divorced, and I believe that is something big that triggered my life. That was something big that you don't start to understand till you become an adult or a teenager. You begin to understand how that affects you. It doesn't affect you right away. What divorce does to a child is it begins to affect them as they begin to develop, as they begin to mature, as they begin to understand what happened, and people talking behind their backs, and you begin to hear the truth of the things that went on in that situation. So in ministry, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. So growing up, that began to affect me. We stayed faithful. My mom never till this day, she never left the church. My mom instructed us in the gospel, and she did her very best. But when that happened, mom had to go to work, and she had to begin to provide for us. So she wasn't around. She lived with us. She made sure we ate. She made sure we had food and clothes. But the thing is, she wasn't there because she had always had to be providing for us. So that gives you as a kid a lot of liberty to start experimenting stuff and to start, learning bad habits. And in saying that, growing up, I began to kind of just move away from the things of God. I began to be influenced by friends, by school, by different things that the world offers teenagers, that the world offers kids. And I remember I began to experiment with alcohol. I began to experiment with drugs. And these things slowly, they don't come and take over your life immediately. They come slowly like a cancer and just begin to kill you spiritually and then and physically also. They begin to take things away. That's what the world does. That's what the enemy does. That's what drugs do. That's what alcohol does. It begins to take. It begins to take everything. And first it'll take your peace. First it'll take your joy. Then it'll take your money. It'll take your belongings. And I remember through all these experiments, and going to my teenagers, I was still okay. But when I hit my middle 20s and on up to the 30s, I began to get really, really involved in darker things, heavier drugs, just darker things that life can offer you. And by the time I knew it, I was just engulfed in what we call sin. And what sin does, sin begins to destroy you, because the Bible says that the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And let me tell you something. He killed a lot of stuff in my life. He killed my joy. He killed my peace. And those are things that we take for granted. And he stole everything that I could possibly own. The enemy took it. The last thing that he had left to do was just to kill me. And trust me, there were plenty of times during these 10 to 15 years that I was just lost, that the enemy could have killed me many. Okay, so getting engulfed in drugs so bad. And I remember, I believe it was in 2002, I was blessed out of marriage, out of wedlock, with a little girl whom I love so much. Tessa was born in 2002. And I was blessed to be able to enjoy having a daughter. And even that, George, I'll have you know, man, sin took that away. I remember when she was born, I was so lost, man. I was hitting the club scene. I was selling drugs. I was consuming drugs. I was so lost in alcohol. Till one day, even she got taken away from me. Even her mother one day said, you know what? It's not safe for her to be around you. And you want to experience pain? That's pain. Remember when I told you that the enemy takes and takes and takes? That is truly what he does. Kills, steals, and destroys. So in 2002, she was born. And I remember at 4 or 5 years old, they told me, you're not going to be able to see your daughter no more because of the way you are, because of how lost you are, and that hurt. So that just threw me more into the drink and more into the drugs. And I remember in 2007, this is kind of a funny story, but I remember this is where it just started going completely downhill. 2007, I was coming home from a bar, or a restaurant bar. You remember Gloria's, George?
Oh,
yeah. They're in Dallas. Well, I remember there was a time, I don't even know if they still do it, this was years ago, to where at nighttime it would become an all-out club. Just people would just go and swarm. Well, I remember I went there one night, and I left there in the car just drunk, sleepy, just ready to get home. And I remember on Main Street, right there in Grand Prairie, this is all real stuff, true stuff, raw. I'm going through Grand Prairie Main Street, and I see a Jack in the Box. So I stopped and said, I'm going to try to sober up a little bit. So I'm in the drive-thru, and there's a car in front of me ordering at the drive-thru, and I'm the next one to order. So while he's ordering, I said, I'm gonna just close my eyes for just a few seconds. And I closed my eyes for longer than that. And next thing I remember, there's a cop knocking with his flashlight, just like you see in the movies, just with his flashlight, knocking on the window. And needless to say, I get arrested. And that was my first DWI. And I remember that one was just, I went to jail. Next day, they bailed me out, and nothing changed. It was a slap on the wrist. Fast forward a few years later, getting just more involved in that lifestyle that just swallows you up completely. And those of you that will watch this will know exactly what I'm talking about. That life consumes you and it just takes you over. And in 2000, a few years later, that was just a few years later, I had got my second DWI. I believe it was in 2011. Second DWI. And I remember this time me and my friend had partied. It was on a New Year's Eve. Got the buddies together, the girls together, and we just partied. Well, me and him didn't want to stop partying. We partied till morning time. So he goes to his house. I'm going to go pick up some stuff and then meet him back at his house. And as I'm driving, I remember I was in the middle of Grand Prairie in Arlington. I get to a red light and I fall asleep again. Cop gets me, and just this time I had drugs on me. So it's the second DWI with drugs this time. Go to jail, they get me out again. And I will have you know, I got put on probation. I was on probation, going to court, all that stuff, just spending thousands of dollars on things like that. And those of you that have been through that situation know how much you're going to spend on a lawyer, court fees, probation fees. And yet at that, I still didn't learn. I was still going hard. So that was 2010. And doing all this on probation with my second DWI on probation, that same year, while on probation, still for this second DWI, I go out with my cousin. We go out, do what we do. I had parked my truck at the Los Lupes on 303, and I said, okay, that's just a couple of blocks down the street. My cousin drops me off. I get in my truck, and I'm driving home drunk, of course, and I see those blue, red, yellow lights.
Oh man, that's
George, it was the worst. That right there was probably one of the worst feelings. Because here in Texas, 3 strikes, and
you're out. Yep, you're out.
You're out. So I'm seeing those cop lights behind me. And I remember I pulled over at that dollar store right there, the Family Dollar. No, Dollar Tree. That's where I stopped. I remember that cop coming to me. And I was going to drug classes, alcohol classes. And I remember that cop coming to my window, and I begged him. And it seemed for a split second he was going to be like, okay, cool, go. He says, man, I got to do what I got to do. And I said, man, you don't understand. This is my 3rd one. I'm going to go to the penitentiary. If you just let me go. He goes, I already got the video rolling. I got to take you. Oh, my goodness.
So I bet that was like a come to Jesus moment, huh?
Oh, not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. That wasn't even working, huh?
No, that was a scary feeling, though. I remember. And I went to jail. And for some odd reason, I know my bail was like $3,000 to get out.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, I'm just staying here. I think from here they'll just start my process. But my boss, my boss paid 3 G's, and I was out the next morning. I remember I know why he got me out, because I was doing an important job for him at SMU.
Oh man.
I was doing a job at SMU, and he took me out. But check this out. This guy told me one time, when I got out, I went straight to his office, and he told me something that kind of marked my life. He said, Sam, you're a good worker. He goes, and you're a good guy. He goes, but you're just a drunk. He goes, if you would change that about you, you would be a good man.
Wow.
He said, I want you to know something. We both know you're going to go do time. This is Texas, man. Texas don't play with DWIs. He goes, but I want you to know, when you get out, you got your job. And I was like, wow. But the words that he said, he goes, you can change being a drunk. Because I was a functioning alcoholic. I was a functioning drug addict. I never lost my job. I was a guy, but I would binge Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. go to work hungover on Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, already be in full motion. Thursday, hit it again.
It's ready to go.
And he told me, he goes, you can either be a drunk for the rest of your life or you can change your life. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So I remember, George, after, well, let me tell you what it feels like to be out knowing that you're going to go to prison. Because I still had to report.
Yeah.
So I went to report that the next time I had to report, I told my probation officer, I said, hey, I got arrested. She was like, what? For what? I said, DWI. She goes, you know you're going to go away, right? I was like, yeah. I said, am I going now? She's like, no, just keep reporting. She goes, but more than likely, one of these times in your report, they're going to pick you up from here. Well, I remember being at work, George, that the whole few months, it was 3 months.
Oh, you didn't know when they were coming?
No. They could come get me anytime.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'd be working like this. I'd be driving and just...
Did you think of everything about running?
Nah, I did. This is going to sound crazy. I did think about...
about suicide.
Yeah, prison's scary, man. Prison's a scary place.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, it's better just to off myself. But anyhow, I didn't do that, thank God.
Thank God. Yeah.
So that was the first time I went to go report the second time, and I was like, hey, what's going to happen? She goes, I don't know. One day they're just going to get you. So I remember that was that month. I know it felt horrible because I was just kind of looking over my back. Well, the third time I went to report, I was like, this feels a little weird this time. So I remember going up there. I remember I parked the work truck. I even went in the work truck. I parked my work truck there at my probation office. And I remember going in there, George, like, this feels weird today.
Those are called the heebie-jeebies, right?
Yeah, I felt the heebie-jeebies that day. And I walked into my probation officer's office and she was like, how's it going? And she goes, the supervisor wants to see you today. So I was like, okay. I walked to the supervisor's office and he's just talking. And I said, hey, you don't have to do this.
Oh, he was trying to buy time or something?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not dumb. And I'm like, hey, don't waste your time, man. I don't even want to talk to you anyways. I don't want to hear you. I said, I know what's coming. I'll just wait here patiently.
Oh, my goodness.
And sure enough, two Dallas sheriffs.
Oh.
And it feels embarrassing getting arrested at your probation office.
Oh, my goodness.
Getting escorted out by two. I remember, I'm not being racist. There were two Hispanic guys, super cool. Put me in the car, and I still had my work phone. And they said, you want to call anybody? And I was like, sure, man. I said, because my work truck's right there. He even dialed it because I was in cuffs. He dialed it for me.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So I think I called my sister. And I said, hey, I'm gone. I said, I'm not going to see y'all for at least a year or two, you know. Wow. And George, right there, man, I remember getting to Dallas County. And at that time, in 2010, it was still rough. It still is. But in those times at Lou Sterrett, straight rock and roll, man.
Oh, straight.
And even that can be scary. But I had been there so many times already.
I heard about that green bologna over there.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I've had many times I've seen that. That is true. I don't know. I've been a while since I've been there. Thank God. But I remember being in there, and the whole check-in process is just hours.
Oh my goodness.
So finally, they check me in and they just put you in a big old concrete room just to wait to get you where you're going to sleep at. But I remember sitting in that concrete, just like, okay, I'm caught.
Wow.
Actually, the strange feeling of relief. Okay, let's
get like it's over with.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not going to go. I'm not going to be like that anymore.
Anticipation's gone.
Yeah, anticipation's gone.